Well, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has issued a request for a proposal for developing a long-term vision, implementation plan, roadmap and institutional framework for its One Sun, One World, One Grid program. Back in 2018, speaking at the inauguration of the second edition of the Global Reinvest Meet, Prime Minister Modi had stressed on the importance of solar with his slogan, One World, One Sun, One Grid, through which the Prime Minister implied the coming together of the entire globe to harness solar power 24/7, thus not limiting solar power to daytime alone. With India at the center, the solar spectrum is divided into two broad zones, namely the Far East, which would include countries like Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand and Cambodia, and the Far West, which would cover West Asia and the African region. Through this initiative, India plans to build a global ecosystem of interconnected renewable energy resources that can be seamlessly shared for mutual benefits and global sustainability. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the One Sun, One World, One Grid project. Joining me on the program today are Mohan Kumar, former ambassador, Upendra Tripathi, Director General, International Solar Alliance, and K. Badrinath, senior journalist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, let me start the program first with you, Mr. Tripathi. Let's first try and understand the aim and the objectives and the scope of this mega project.
Well, it's obvious from the name, One Sun, One World, One Grid. So we're talking about the sun, which is known to be, sort of greatest socialist you've ever seen. It doesn't discriminate among the rich and poor, not among the developing countries. It shines everywhere equally as much as it can. So when you're talking about aim and scope, although, the study is yet to come, it is just, the government of India have put a, interest of expression of interest, and it takes around 15 months to be completed. So that will come out with better things. But as of today, from the International Solar Alliance with 88 countries and with our informal and formal discussions at various levels, we understand that one world, one sun and one grid, the basic first aim will be to minimize cost. Because if you're thinking of a viable project and at a global scale, it has to necessarily bring down cost of electricity. And second, we are talking about harmonized distribution. Today, if you find that half of the world, half of the earth is always lighter, half of the earth is in darkness. So if you can feed energy from the lighted half or the lit up half of earth to the other half, and then essentially we are talking about circulation of electricity throughout 24 hours. And then you have countries which have too much of electricity, you have countries who have too little, and you have countries which talk about, solar as oil in the air. And so when you're talking about harmonization of distribution, we're talking about at any point of time, you have different spots on the earth, which have excess of electricity, somewhere there is deficit. So is it possible to harmonize the distribution system globally so that it also adds to minimize cost? And the third point is to develop something called common ownership. Earth is already, a divided place. So if you can have one global asset where everybody owns it, everybody shares it, and that itself becomes a symbol of our values. And except the today's, before IT went to cloud, we had submarine cables, so it's spread all over the earth, all below the ocean. And so we are talking about a future where we are minimizing cost, we are harmonizing distribution, we are talking about a common ownership. And important, we are also developing a system for energy security for all. And when you talk about energy security, we are not only talking about 700 million people who are without electricity, we are talking about 2 billion women who still use cow dung, not cow dung, but primary fuels to cook. So that is aim. Now, when you say scope itself is the whole world. And why? Because if you look at the perimeter of Earth, 2 pi r, you take the radius multiplied by 2 pi, you get around 40,075 kilometers. That is just the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And when you are talking about a global grid, it's not going to be as smooth like the ring of Saturn. It is going to be like the international date line. It will be moving here. It will be connecting all the hotspots on Earth, which are like North Sea will be a hotspot in wind, and the Sahara Desert will be a hotspot in solar. So all those rich spots, and there are spots where both wind and solar will be very rich. And this survey will bring out all these spots which can be interconnected. So one sun, one world, one grid, although it sounds to be very, the circumference a very smooth grid, round in shape. It's not going to be that. And something like an international deadline, it will come. But given those 4 objectives we told, and given the capacity of the sun, 1 hour's radiation today, and whatever 42% in the visible range, because the infrared you don't capture, ultraviolet you don't capture, and roughly 42% of that spectrum, visible spectrum, where we capture only the light, not even the heat part. And that 1 hour's radiation that Earth captures is enough for a full year. And that is the richness we're talking about. The problem has been with our interface with sunlight has been as much as we used 5,000 years back. That is thing. God didn't give us photosynthetic skills. So the skill lies, and the scale lies, and the speed lies, how fast and how cheap we can actually take the energy from the sun. And this is not merely electricity. We are talking about cooling, we are talking about heating, we are talking about transportation. The entire energy spectrum that we use, that can be captured from the sun. So when we are talking about one sun, one world, one grid, we are talking about aims, the 4 aims I mentioned, and the scope, which is global.
Okay, all right. Ambassador, this is where I'd like to bring you in now. As far as, India's role has been concerned, India has played a leading role when it comes to the ISA. And, what kind of an impact has India had in bringing the world together on this stage as far as solar energy is concerned?
So thank you very much for having me on the show. And I'm grateful to my friend and colleague, Mr. Tripathi, together in Paris when we launched the International Solar Alliance. I think 3 things from my perspective. He has said whatever needs to be said on the technical issue in terms of the potential for solar energy. I think from a foreign policy perspective, this is the first time, to my mind, when India is suggesting something on such a global scale, and India is part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. Normally in multilateral negotiations, very much we are seen as part of the problem, But I think this is a paradigm shift in terms of trying to be a part of the global solution. So that's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is really that in terms of South-South cooperation and even trilateral cooperation, I cannot think of a better example than one sun, one world, one grid. This is a monumental project in which, if you, as Mr. Tripathi was saying and you were hinting, if we manage to connect West Asia, Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, you are covering the most dynamic region of the world, economically speaking, and where the region suffers from tremendous deficits of power. If we can succeed with this project, and I see no reason why not, then you are talking about a paradigm shift in terms of providing a boost for the global economy. So India becoming a responsible stakeholder in the multilateral system, India becoming part of a global solution, and India making a proposal which could actually signal a paradigmatic change in economic activity and contribution to global economic growth. So this is the way I see this absolutely phenomenal proposal and project.
Okay, all right. K. Badrinath, so what is the potential really as far as solar energy is concerned? And do financial institutions and governments understand the importance of solar energy?
Well, the potential is huge and humongous, as Mr. Tripathi was making in his initial remarks, because the limitless, solar energy, which needs to be tapped as a clean energy source, is the biggest advantage for the mankind, the humankind, that we are going to leave or we are going to offer in terms of the present generation as well as the future. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken this great initiative to bring in this globally interconnected solar system. However, there's a lot of challenges as well as opportunities in terms of implementing this project. cost of energy that is going to be generated from the system and the technology are going to be the two biggest issues that need to be addressed collectively by the global community. Why, if this project is going to be a monumental, as I know my other co-panelists have stated, if it's going to be a monumental, huge project, which is the need of the hour, but we need to address two issues. One, technology. Second, cost-effective finance, which is required. And the financial institutions and banks definitely understand the importance of this project. My guess, not only the multilateral organizations, but even bilateral and national financial institutions in different countries do know that this is a project which is sustainable and is possibly bankable proposition for the mankind.
Okay, all right. This is a very important point that you raised about, cost-effective finance. What has our experience taught us over the last couple of years, Mr. Tripathi, as far as the ISA is concerned? Have we been able to mobilize the kind of finances that we need? I think there is about 1,000 billion US dollars that have been raised over the last couple of years for 88 member countries, and India has played an instrumental role in all of this. What is India's role going to be?
Well, India has come up with, the spurt of new ideas. They call it 21st century ideas. International Solar Alliance itself was one such powerful idea. And the second idea is, of course, the one world, one sun, one grid. And India has come up with a third idea also. It's called World Solar Bank. And that is what was highly being appreciated the other day by UN members, UN representatives who spoke in that webinar, saying that, some of the real powerful ideas. Now, when you talk about the World Solar Bank, it is not that India didn't have a multilateral body, so they got in ISA, or India doesn't have a multilateral bank also. I mean, if you look at China, they have two banks. If you look at USA, they have World Bank. So, but the idea behind the World Solar Bank is simple. And again, it is South-South. Because if you look at, if you bring a global grid, one sun, one world, one grid, the maximum capital problems will come for small island countries and least developed countries. And then how do you address their capital needs? That is where the World Solar Bank will step in. They're talking initially very simple, $2 billion equity and $6 billion callable capital and $10 billion, authorized capital. But with $2 billion, you can raise $8 billion in the market. And with $10 billion, if you co-finance with the World Bank, only 20% of the project cost you gave loan and 80% they give, so that transaction cost is minimal. They do all security studies, due diligence, you don't do anything. And that way, we are mobilizing $50 billion a year. And $50 billion over a period of 10 years, $500 billion, you bring in. And you give the money to the really needy countries, the sovereign countries. And not only that, when you're talking about in the ISA's framework, when the one sun, one world, one grid come, you look at the cost factor. First, we talked about grid parity. ISA was trying that in member countries, the cost of solar should be equal to cost of coal energy or thermal energy. Now, we're not talking anymore about grid parity. We're talking about kerosene parity, which means the poor people, they spend around $15 a month in kerosene, and the solar should be available at that rate, and it is going to come. And once that happens, ISA is not going to stop there. We're talking about near zero cost. So if you look at the cost curve, the way it is coming down, and to bring down, you have to bring down the cost of capital and bring down the cost of technology. And that is where this $1,000 billion came in. So ISA's role will not only be in the one world, one sun, one grid to be a regulator of widespread generation. And I'm not going to the role of storage and mini grid, because storage is going to be a massive source of employment in rural India in no time to come. So integration of all these things, the mini grid, the off grid, the storage, the global grid, that whole role will be played by ISA, because it's a very strong body with initially it was limited to tropical countries, but now it is open to all, except that amendment needs 3 more countries to support. And then even countries like Germany, Spain, Italy, Nepal, Mongolia, every country can be a member, which means potentially India will have one international body in India where not 121 countries will be members, but 194 countries will be members. So it is actually for mankind is here.
Okay, all right, Ambassador. Since we're talking about the International Solar Alliance, and since you played a big role there as well, how keen is the world when it comes to harnessing the energy of the sun? And what has our experience with the ISA taught us over the last few years?
So I think the developed countries, I must say very frankly, if you follow the climate change negotiations, the developed countries reneged on their commitments. And that is why the Kyoto Protocol failed miserably. I think this project, this International Solar Alliance, and now the One Sun, One World, One Grid, offers a fantastic opportunity to the developed, rich countries to redeem themselves. They have an obligation to assist countries which are members of the ISA through financing. Because frankly, we have not been responsible for most of the greenhouse gas emissions. We are going to be responsible 50 years from now. All the greenhouse gas emissions that you find now, the responsibility actually lies with the developed countries. So my sense is they will be quite happy to help us. I saw on the website of the International Solar Alliance, the World Bank is helping us, the European Investment Bank is helping us, the Asian Infrastructure Bank is helping us. So I think there will be no dearth of financing. I agree that affordable finance and accessible technology are the two mantras if One Sun, One World, One Grid has to take off. But my point is, frankly, if you have 121 countries, as Mr. Tripathi says, you will have a certain harmonization of standards. You will have a certain uniformity of regulatory mechanisms. You will have a certain commonality in terms of importing solar panels. This itself should make financing very, very easy. Because when I'm looking at 100 countries, immediately the banks will say, this is very, very easy to lend money, and the cost of solar energy is going down. So it is actually a win-win situation. And I do not see finance being such a big problem. The cost of finance is a bit of a problem, but I think if the cost of solar energy can match it, I think that will not be a problem. What my concern, if you don't mind, one concern I have is patented technology and the issue of intellectual property rights. I was India's negotiator for intellectual property rights in the WTO. I think the developed countries must be flexible when it comes to intellectual property rights and transferring the latest technology to countries which are members of the Solar Alliance. It is in their interest that the pathway for these countries is based on sustainable development. So the rules of sustainable development must trump the mercenary commercial considerations of intellectual property rights. If that is taken care of, I do not see this project really getting stopped in its tracks. It's ready to take off, and I think it's a brilliant way of actually creating a pathway for total sustainable development in countries such as ours.
Absolutely. These are very valid points that you're making, and let's hope that, the project takes off the way we would like it to. But, K. Badrinath, talking about a different aspect altogether, in the past, we've seen that whenever technologies and breakthroughs have been made like this, there have been certain fossil fuel lobbies that have, put a spanner in the works. Is that a concern now going forward as far as solar energy is concerned as well?
Like any commercial deal or any major global deal, the lobbies are bound to be there, irrespective of whether it is official lobbies or unofficial non-state actors. There are going to be lobbies. It doesn't mean that we need to end this initiative or we need to pull back. My guess is in the world of finance and technology, where these two key issues need to be addressed to take this project to the doorstep of the people globally, then we need to definitely learn to live with these, lobbies. Number one. Number two, India's transparent systems that the solar alliance that India has tried to put together in conjunction with the members of the alliance, my guess is there will be very little scope for lobbyists or interest groups that will be trying to hijack the project. But definitely, who will be benefited the most is a question everybody will be looking at. Well, how many jobs will be created? Who would get how many jobs? What kind of jobs do they get? The skilled personnel that you're looking at, the entire ecosystem of training these professionals to manage the project. Then, apart from that, in the long run, what is it that is going to keep the project going or the issues that need to be addressed at this point of time? It is not that, they cannot be addressed, but definitely care needs to be taken by the global community as to how we are going to approach this, say for next 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years, as to how the dividends of this beautiful project are properly distributed so that the collective consents of the global community would come to work and maximum people would benefit in terms of changed the transport system, change the economic system, and change logistics. So many things will follow. So point I'm trying to make is both the hardware, the software. So there are so many aspects to this project that it is definitely a complex project, but it is doable and it is definitely going to be a big thing. And as Mrs. Tripathi said, India's role here is going to be remembered forever.
All right, then taking the discussion forward. So, Mr. Tripathi, as far as the One Sun, One World, One Grid project is concerned, what role do you see, other renewables playing in ensuring that we enhance the project as a whole?
Well, two things I talked about. One is, of course, in the Solar Alliance, we talk about, one is solar energy and the other is solar derivatives like wind. So, and I also talked about the hotspots, being reached either in solar or in wind or in a combination of both. So when you're talking about the, one sun, one world, one grid, in our vision, sun alone, of course, although theoretically it's enough, but then we should not ignore other forms of solar derivatives. They both will come in. And that perhaps will help the cost to be down because, between wind at night, the cost of wind at night and the cost of stored, solar energy at night, that will also decide whether you use stored solar energy or wind and what is the cost of storage that is going to, be. And if you look at the PV cost, for example, in the last 10 years, it has come down by 80%. Similarly, the cost of lithium ion storage, that is also drastically coming down. So in future, when we are talking about one sun, one world, one grid, the storage systems are going to play, big role. And, this project, it will be broken into regional pieces because it's not going to start. The study itself is going to take 15 minutes. Bigger the project, more time taking in the study and more nitty-gritties have to be addressed. The other important aspect will also be not only the cost of energy, but also impact on employment because many countries, many ministers would be looking, okay, the project is fine, CO2 is coming down, is good, but tell me what is going to happen to the electorate? I mean, how the employment is going to face. So today, if you look at the global scenario, you have around 11 million people in the renewable energy sector and roughly around 17.5% of, energy it contributes in the energy basket. But presuming that it becomes 100% and you make a simple estimation, 11.6.5 something, it will be around 66 million people can be employed, in a world where it is totally run by renewables. Of course, then you have to subtract, the coal will be closed and, the other gas forms and other things, so you have to take them out. So my point is, it is difficult to say actually what type of impact it will have and how to, synthesize all those variables. But as we move along, to regional grids and then to the global grid, the interconnectivity between the grids, the type of technology or integration that will bring it. And one thing to be sure that the global grid doesn't mean it will be the only grid. It'll have feeder grids. We will take care of the existing grids country-wise, and the HDC transmission inter-country or inter-region, the use of submarine cables that exist for data transfer now, in future which we may not need. So a lot of technological details have to be looked into and have to be worked out.
Sure. Okay. I want to bring in a completely different aspect right now. So, Ambassador, many analysts or some analysts are suggesting that this could be the answer to China's BRI. How would you look at it?
So, I think one has to be a little careful when you compare apples and oranges, if you like, because this is, first of all, I see this as a project that has not faced any opposition whatsoever. It is based on principles of transparency. It is completely based on principles of sustainable development, and there is no problem of unviable debt. So this project of one world, one solar, one grid in that sense bears no resemblance to BRI. BRI is a project that is aimed at helping China, understandable, because they are financing it in large part. And it is also a project that is based on certain principles with which we do not agree. But having said that, I do believe that this project, if taken in conjunction with what we are doing in Indo-Pacific, what we are doing in the Asia-Africa growth corridor, for example, in which RAS is heavily involved, and I happen to be chairman RAS. So if taken in conjunction with these things, you could argue we are providing an answer to BRI. But otherwise, BRI, to my mind, deals with things which are completely different. Whereas this project has got universal acceptability, it is transparent, and it is based on 100% principle of sustainable development, something I would not say with regard to BRI.
Right. Okay. All right. Time now to get a quick closing comment from K. Badrinath with the best way forward.
The best way forward, perhaps to my mind, my individual opinion is that, ensuring transparency in implementation of the project, number one. Number two, taking all the stakeholders together, whether it is developed, whether it is least developed, or the Pacific region, any region that you think of, is going to be a huge challenge. But if it is worked out beautifully, perhaps this is going to be a huge success. Third part is that, tapping solar energy is not a new thing for a country like India, which is rich, heritage of over 5,000 years. So what we have been looking at the sun as a source of energy has been from times immemorial. So I guess building upon this, like you have built upon yoga, like you have built upon several indigenized medical systems like Ayurveda, Unani and others, the Solar Alliance is going to be a huge answer for bringing about a transformational change at global level, and it is doable. And my guess is this signature project of Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to be a huge one.
Okay. All right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the project is going to ensure a transformational change really as far as how the world is interconnected is what the panelists are suggesting. It's going to be a transparent project which is going to bring the world closer together, in which India is going to be providing a solution. Of course, technological aspects need to be addressed, and we also have to ensure cost-effective financing is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.